All right, this is Algebra 2, Lesson 5.4. Our objective is to perform operations with complex numbers. Complex numbers create the imaginary unit for mathematics. So the imaginary unit is needed in order to do some additional calculations with negatives under the square root. So we have real numbers that are broken apart into rational numbers and irrational numbers, and now the complex numbers are a larger set of numbers because they consist of a complex number that has part of it being real and part of it being imaginary. So what is the imaginary unit? The imaginary unit is I. I is equivalent to the square root of a negative 1. So in the complex numbers, we can take the square root of a negative number. In the real number system, we can't do that because there's no such number that gives us that value. So we're creating this number that does give us that value. So I can break these numbers apart into a negative number and a positive number. So this would simplify into the square root of a negative 1 with the square root of 25. So 25 times negative 1 is going to give me 25. The square root of 25 is 5, and we defined the square root of negative 1 as I. So we just write 5i. That's it. 5i. So anytime we're taking the square root of a negative number, we're going to be using this I term. Let's look at the square root of negative 18. This would be the square root of 9 times the square root of 2. 9 times 2 is 18. Times the square root of negative 1. So remember, square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 2 is the square root of 2. But now we also can do the square root of negative 1. The square root of negative 1 is I. Let's look at the last one. This can simplify into the square root of 25 times the square root of 5 times the square root of negative 1. Again, the square root of 25 times 5 is the 125, and then you have the negative. So the square root of 25 is 5. We leave the square root of 5. Can't simplify that at all. But the square root of a negative 1 is the I. All right, when we multiply together, this is what gets interesting. Because think about what happens. So we have 3 times 4. That's going to give me a 12. And then we can take I times I. Just like when we have x times x, we're going to do I times I, which is I squared. Now let's think about this for a moment. If I take I squared, that means I'm taking the square root of negative 1 and I'm squaring it. So the square and the square root cancel. So this value is actually a negative 1. So if I take 12 times the negative 1, I'm going to get negative 12. So when I multiply two imaginary numbers together, I actually get a real value of negative 12. All right, let's take a look at the next one. So we have a negative 20 times the square root of a negative 12. So remember, this is going to be an I. Okay? So I have the square root of 20, and I can take out that I. And I can also do the square root of the negative here, and I can take out the I, and I'll have the square root of 12. Okay, so now let's do the square root of 20. The square root of 20 is going to be 4 times 5. And so I get the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. I have that I again. This is also the square root of 4, but then times the square root of 3. 4 times 3 is 12. 4 times 5 is 20. So I can do the square root of 4. I can do the square root of 4. And then I have to leave these two numbers alone. Okay, so working over here, I still have the square root of 4 as a 2. I have this square root of 4 as a 2. I have the I times the I, which is an I squared. And I have the square root of 5 times the square root of 3, which is the square root of 15. Okay, continuing. 2 times 2 is 4. Now remember, I squared was what? When we did the I squared here before, that was that negative 1. So this is going to become a negative value. So I'm going to get negative 4 square root of 15. Final answer. All right, so let's think about all these powers of I. You can actually do I into the calculator, but you have to be in complex mode. So let's just talk about that for a moment. So in the calculator, you would need to be in complex mode in order to do the I value. Let me see if I can show you. So you would hit the mode button, and you can come down here and see I need to be in A plus BI mode. So I'll come down and hit enter. That'll change it into complex mode. Okay, let's do some calculations. So if I do 3, the I is right down here on the decimal, so you have to go second decimal, times 4I. And that will equal -12. So you see it works on the calculator. The I was right down here on that decimal. See that blue I? So you have to hit the second key and the decimal. All right? Now we can do the other calculations too. Okay, so if I do the I squared, so second decimal, and then hit the squared key, you'll get the -1. All right, so you can keep going, second decimal, and then hit the cubed key. Whoops, sorry. Caret 3. And that's -I. And then you use second decimal, and you can raise it to the 4th power, and you'll get 1. Well, that should make sense. I squared times I squared would be I to the 4th, so -1 times -1 should be 1. Okay, so there you can see all those values. All right, we can just keep going then. I to the 5th, I to the 6th. So all of these values become, this was just I, this was 1, negative, this was -I, and this was 1. So I to the 5th would just be I to the 4th times I. Well, I to the 4th is 1, so 1 times I is I. Well, that's just the same as this. Okay, I to the 6th would be I to the 4th times I squared. So again, I to the 4th is 1. 1 times I squared, well, I squared we know is -1, so this value is -1. So I to the 7th would be I to the 4th times I cubed. Well, I cubed was -I, so I'm just going to get -I. So these just keep repeating. So I to the 8th would be I to the 4th times I to the 4th. 1 times 1 is 1. So we're just going to keep repeating every 4. So it's a pattern of 4. So I to the 9th would be the same as I to the 1st, it's I. I to the 10th is the same as I squared, -1. I to the 11th would be the same as I cubed, or -I. I to the 12th would be the same as I to the 4th, so 1. So I can figure out any value just by dividing by a pattern of 4. For example, if I take 9 and divide it by 4, I'll get 2 with a remainder of 1. The remainder of 1 tells me to go to the first value of I. So I to the 1st is I. If I do the 10 divided by 4 is 2 with a remainder of 2. So I'm going to go to the second I squared, and that's going to be -1. So it works out. So if I just divide by 4 and look at the remainder, that'll be my power of I on any value. So I could come back and I could find I to the 50th. Well, what does that equal? I take 50 divided by 4. 4 goes into 5 once. 4 goes into 10 twice. So I have a 2 for a remainder. Well, I squared is the same as -1. So I to the 50th will be -1. So I to the 50th is -1. So it's just whatever your remainder is, that's what you're going to go to. Which one is it? Is the first, the second, the third, or the 4th? That's going to be your solution then. I, -1, -I, or 1. All right, let's take a look at the next page. Oh, it says to solve